So we're finally going to make this video explaining a little bit of the costs on what it takes to swap one of these BMWs. We've got a little bit of a breakdown here, basic categories we're going to go through. Engine, transmission, clutch, torque converter, drive shaft, differential, fuel, plumbing, exhaust and intake, accessory drive, the mounts you need to do it, and we'll talk a little bit about forced induction. So to get things started with an engine, your real cheap option here is to go to the junkyard, get a 4.8 or 5.3, and you can expect to spend maybe $400 on one of those. Mid-range options, what we're going to do here is kind of like a semi-built, something like it's in my car, be like a 6-liter with a cam. You go buy a 6-liter on the street, take the heads off, you know, put some gaskets in it, you're going to be in about $1,500. The high end here, we're going to talk about like the extreme end. So you're going to go to Texas Speed or to some engine builder and just buy a long block off the shelf. So you could be up to like, say, 10 grand here. So this is one that people don't really understand when they get into this swap, is you can have $400 in an engine or you can have 10 grand in an engine. So that's a big category on price. Add-ons, with any of these, if you want to add some more stuff to it, you want to take your $400 short block and put $1,000 in it to put a cam in it, or you want to put aftermarket heads on it, might cost $2 grand, or you want to put, you know, a billet block on an aftermarket motor. So this add-ons can range from 1 to, say, another, honestly, 5 grand, something like that. Kind of around this 1,000 range for the basic guy if you're just going to go through a motor. Transmission. We're only going to go through the GM options here. There's other options, but they get complicated. So with this, we're going to stay the simple swap, like my car or Frank's car in the white video that we did. So with a manual transmission, you got a T56 or a TR6060. You can expect to spend on the street for one of those. Around here, you're going to find T56 for, say, $1,200. That'd be like the cheap range. A TR6060 maybe a little bit cheaper. So we'll just say $1,200 here. The mid-range, say you want to get one of these built, you're going to go through it, send it out to have somebody redo it. You're probably going to spend another $2,000 to $2,500 on this same transmission. So in the mid-range, you'd be at maybe $3,700. High range for a manual, you can go buy a T56 Magnum off the shelf, ready to go, and probably spend about $3,800. And you need a couple things to go with that, like a bell housing. So you can see here, this is a pretty good option if you just want something off the shelf. Add-ons, we're not going to do this one here because we already basically talked about building a motor or building a transmission here off one you're going to buy on the street. All right, for your automatic GM transmission options, your cheapest option here, if you were the guy that went and bought a $400 from the junkyard, $400 engine from the junkyard, you're probably going to have a 4L60. You can pick up a 4L60 for around here, say $200. That's the cheap option. If you want to make some more power, you want to go through the transmission, around here you can pick up a 4L80 automatic for about $700, $800, put a shift kit in it and be ready to go for under $1 grand. So we'll just say somewhere around $900 here, if I could write. On the high end, if you want to buy something off the shelf, you want to go to Summit, buy an FTI Turbo 400, a built 4L80, lots of options there. Now you're talking about in the range of more like $2,500 for a built automatic transmission off the shelf. Add-ons really don't apply here. The clutch options for a manual transmission, on the cheap end, you can use an Ls7 clutch off the shelf. Holds decent power for the money. What's an Ls7 cost nowadays? Like
$300
$300
for
to
the
$400.
kit. Yeah. Amazon has them $286.
So it's like $400 with tax and shipping and everything. In the mid-range, there's a lot of options here. You got Monster, McLeod, Spec. There's a lot of clutches you can buy that are just a little more than this, say in the $600-700 range. They're going to hold a little more power. Or if you get up into the high end, you start looking at twin discs, something to hold 800, 1,000 horsepower, the McLeods or the Monsters, things like that. Expect to spend up here in the probably about $1,300 range if you get a brand new one with a flywheel that matches. Torque converters, if you're going on the cheap end, on this route where you get a $400 motor and a 4L60, torque converter won't cost you anything because it comes with the transmission. Mid-range, you can buy hundreds and hundreds of GM torque converters, Summit, Jegs, off of eBay, guys like that spend $300–400, something in that range, for just a generic stall. On the high end, you have some of the Circle Ds. There's some billet converters on Summit and Jegs as well. You can get into the better multi-disc lockup converters for the 4L80s, or a Pro Torque if you start going into you know, a 3-speed transmissions. But basically here you're looking at 1,000 plus. Realistically, on the high end, you probably can put on the list $1,200. Drive shaft. Frank's car, we bought a $250 steel drive shaft delivered off of eBay. I've used it in a lot of builds. That's pretty much bottom of the barrel. You're going to get somebody to build a brand new drive shaft for you. So we'll just put $250 there. On the mid-range, if you want to get an aluminum drive shaft or a chromoly one, you're going to spend a little more money. I think you can get a chromoly drive shaft on Summit built 2-length 1350s for around $500. And on the high end, you want to go crazy, you want to go to Drive Shaft Shop, get one of their adapters, a carbon fiber shaft. You're talking, you know, $1,000 to $1,500. Add-ons on drive shafts, you may need some adapters. We have a little adapter for a base model car to bolt a standard 1350 companion flange on it. So you may have you know, $100 to $200 on add-ons, depending on which drive shaft you go on to make everything work. You might need to buy a slip yoke to go with this trans or this drive shaft, depending on your setup. The differential. The cheap guys, you're just going to go ahead and reuse your stock differential that's in your car. So that's not going to cost you anything. You already have it. There's some options for upgrading some of the BMW differentials. I'm not really familiar with them, but there are options for dropping like an M3 diff in, things like that. And I believe those options, you're going to spend around $1,500 to source those parts and swap in a diff.
Going back to the cheap one, should you mention the difference between like the 325s and the 335s?
Yeah, so here on the cheap option, if you're going to use the BMW differential, a base model car has a companion flange. It's really easy to make this drive shaft work with. If you have a 335i, they have a kind of an oddball threaded companion flange, and no one has an adapter for those right now. So on this option, you may be taking your 335 drive shaft and having it modified, putting a new front yoke on it. You're going to find varying price ranges on that, whether or not you get it balanced or not, or you just do the front section. But I've heard guys that have experiences with this being expensive. I wouldn't expect you should pay more than $200 to get a drive shaft modified. If you go to like a BMW specific shop, they're probably going to gouge you on that, and you're going to end up spending $600–700. So on the high end with the differential, if you go to an 8.8 or you go to some crazy IRS 9-inch swap, the differential brackets I sell pretty cheap, under $300 to bolt in the differential. But you still need to get axle shafts. You can get them from Drive Shaft Shop, G-Force, the guys over at Seems Legit Garage make some that work with my kit. And this kind of ties in with the drive shaft option. So if you're going to change the differential, kind of think about that before you build a drive shaft. Otherwise, you're going to have to change that down the road. So a round ballpark figure on an 8.8 swap, you got axles that are around $1,750, $1,800. You got my brackets, or the Seems Legit brackets, a differential, going through the differential to make it limited slip. You're probably going to have about $2,500 to $3,000 in that swap to go to an 8.8. But then you got a pretty bulletproof setup you really don't have to worry about. All right, fuel system. The base cheap way to go here would be just to leave the BMW fuel system the way it is. Put a conversion fitting on the front line like we did to fire up Frank's car in the first video. So that's basically going to cost you 20 bucks for a conversion fitting at the front end, and then plug it into the LS fuel rail. In this same group, we're going to have fuel injectors, rails, things like that that work with the LS. So on this cheap range, this would be dropping in the fuel rails and injectors you got with your $400 motor if you get a long block from a junkyard or a complete engine from a junkyard. On the mid-range, I'll use my car for example. I have a set of Snake Eater $1,500, or they're not $1,500. I have a set of Snake Eater 1500cc injectors on mine, which are a very affordable, high-flowing injector that's gotten pretty popular nowadays, that are under $500. You can spend upwards of $2,000 on a set of higher flowing injectors. But I have, we can just go through it front to back. I have 2 Walbro 450s in my car. Let's say that's $300. I have about $200 in line. I got about a $150 fuel pressure regulator. And what else is in the system? Set of $450 Snake Eater injectors, and I'm using the stock new body style rails with a couple conversion fittings. I didn't add that up as I was going, but I would say there's probably
like injectors are $400. You got $150 regulator.
$1,200 in this whole system.
I think
in parts. So we'll just say $1,200 here. By the time you buy the fittings and a gauge and things like that. This is kind of mid-range to make good power. You don't really want to skimp out on the fuel system, so expect to spend a decent amount of money here if you want to make some power. Then on the high end, if you go crazy with some like brushless pumps, big giant lines, FIC injectors, high-end stuff, I mean, you could probably spend $3,000 to $4,000 here, so we'll just say $3,500. And this like varies greatly depending on what you're doing.
Should really make the 1200 more like 1800, because like the radium stuff that Frank uses.
Okay.
I don't see how you can beat that setup.
Yeah, so we'll put that on add-ons. And if you want to do a radium setup, or you want to do an external surge tank, and feed it from the stock system, so you don't have to mess with any of the surge line stuff. So that's like another $600. I don't have a surge tank set up on mine. I completely gutted my tanks and reconfigured it. It's a lot more work, but if you want to try to save that money and do it this way, it works. Or you can get the radium surge tank, or like a nuke external surge tank or something like that. It makes the entire system a little more simple, and you don't have to modify as much stuff.
Yeah, we showed it in the video with Frank's fuel system, and I mean, it's got a built-in regulator and everything else, room for 2 450s, so really nice little setup.
Yeah, nice little unit for the price for sure. Okay, we'll move on to plumbing. By plumbing, I mean basically the miscellaneous hoses you're going to need to connect your radiator to the BMW engine, vacuum line, coolant hoses for the heater, the overflow tank, plumbing to the steam vents on the engine. Basically, people like us, we kind of have rolls of this stuff laying around the shop. So hose and things like that, pretty affordable when you buy it in bulk. But if you're going to run to O'Reilly's and buy a couple radiator hoses, some line, just to get it going, probably on the cheap end, I would say expect to spend probably $75 here. The radiator hoses being the most expensive parts, everything else is kind of miscellaneous. If you want to do it a little nicer with some silicone hoses, things like that, probably expect to spend maybe $200. You got some nice perma clamps, or you want to start doing a few AN lines, things like that. If you want to go crazy, you want to make everything perfect, show quality, I mean, you can easily spend $1,000 here, making everything super nice. You want to do AN upper and lower lines, hard line, everything else. You can spend a bunch of money on plumbing, but really, $100, $200 should get you through.
And we figured out what hoses they were, right?
Yeah, we have the hoses you need to plumb on an F-body setup. If you look through the swap series, I think it's part 2.
Yeah,
either the end of part 2 or the
part
beginning of part 3. Show you how to plumb the F-body setup really easily. Mine is an L99 water pump, so it's a little different, but similar. The lower is the same, the upper is a little different because the outlet's on the driver's side. But again, I'm probably in the $150 to $200 range on my car. Exhaust. Exhaust is going to be dependent on whether or not your car is NA or forced induction. On the cheap end here, like in Frank's white car, we used a set of Gen 5 exhaust manifolds. He picked those up locally for 50 bucks. And then I went ahead and built some exhaust. If you bring a car to an exhaust shop with just manifolds on it, you tell them, run it out the back, put a set of mufflers on it, I'd expect to spend on the cheap end probably $300, probably $300. If you want to buy nice mufflers, you're going to have to pay for the mufflers in addition. So on the cheap end, you still should be below, say 350 bucks. On the mid-range, if you want to go stainless, bigger mufflers, bigger piping, X-pipe, things like that, quality, TIG welded exhaust, you can probably expect to start getting into like the $600 range. You know, you got 2 mufflers that cost $200 a piece, plus some stainless pipe. On the high end, probably closer to this, but maybe you can get up into like 800 bucks for an NA setup. In addition to here, it would be headers. So if you're going to buy a set of the CX Racing headers, which are the only confirmed ones that fit now as far as an aftermarket tubular header, I believe just the headers alone are about $600. So you buy their kit and then bring it to an exhaust shop and let them get it out the back. You'll have somewhere in the range of 600, 400, you know, just under $1,000 up near here, depending on the quality of the exhaust you have built. Okay, as far as the intake, mostly what we're talking about here is the intake manifold to the engine. On a normal hood style, you're only going to fit a car intake, so your factory options are like an LS1, LS6, LS3 intake. The cheap guys here, you should be able to find an LS1 intake, get it with the rails. You're going to go ahead and get a 3-bolt to 4-bolt throttle body adapter, so you can easily run a 4-bolt drive-by-wire throttle body on it. The total there, you should be able to get all that stuff for around $200, depending on where you are. Some places they get a little more for an LS1 intake, but you get on eBay, you should be able to find everything you need there for about 200 bucks. On the mid-range, if you want to go up to like an LS6 intake, or you would start getting into some of the aftermarket of cast aluminum intakes, things like that, you're going to spend a little more money, and that's going to be totally dependent on the setup that you're running. But we're just going to call this mid-range one here an LS6. So locally, $300 to $400, you should be able to find one of those. That's kind of on the high range around here, but I know a lot of places they're a little more difficult to find. So I'll just say $400 here. On the high range, if you want to buy a, like we were talking about before, a cast intake, a high ram, a BTR, an MSD Atomic, or something like that. Now you're getting up into you know, the 8 to 9, or I guess a fast 102 is probably more like $900.
Yeah, that's.
So once you get everything you need to make one of these aftermarket intakes like that with rails, there's one right there, special fuel rails and things like that, you probably are going to spend $1,000. Add-ons here, you need a drive-by-wire throttle body. You can get an eBay one. Some people have some luck with them. They're fairly affordable, or you can get a like a GM LS3 throttle body. So you probably expect to spend about $250 on a decent throttle body, and then you need a filter, some silicone couplers, and some intake pipe for an NA setup. So you can probably expect to spend about another $50 there.
MAF insert as well.
Yeah, if it's a MAF car, well, pretty much everybody here is going to be Holly, so I'm not going to worry about that. It's going to be speed density. Accessory drive. So when I say accessory drive, I'm talking about the components that you're going to need as far as the water pump, the harmonic balancer, the GM alternator, and the tensioner. I'm assuming you're going to buy my LSE90 accessory drive, so you're going to be reusing the BMW power steering pump. So on the cheap end, the guy that's buying this $400 junkyard motor, the accessory drive isn't going to cost you anything, because you're going to go ahead and reuse that junkyard water pump, harmonic balancer, and tensioner, so that's not going to cost anything. On the mid-range, you're going to go and buy everything new from O'Reilly's or Amazon, something like that. Water pump, alternator, harmonic balancer. You're probably talking $200 for a water pump, $200 for an alternator, $50 for a harmonic balancer, $50 for a tensioner. So $400 or $500. So you're gonna go buy everything new. Not gonna source anything locally. And on the high end, if you go to a blower or something like that, you're not going to want to use my drive because it's not meant for the belt tension of a supercharger. You go to like Holley setup or one of the other aftermarkets, you can easily spend up to like $750 on a setup like that made for a blower.
You can also do like electric water pumps.
Yeah, electric water pumps.
Giant alternators.
Big alternators, underdrive pulleys, an ATI balancer, things like that. So I mean, you got add-ons there. You can kind of go wild on the accessory drive on these things. Since it's an LS, there's so many options. So if you want to build, a crazy setup with an ATI, electric water pump, there's another 1,000 plus here, just on that, if you want to go crazy.
You can use anything that fits an LS engine as long as it matches the spacing you plan on using.
Right. Yeah, I'm gonna put a page up about accessory drive spacing as far as LS goes, because I know a lot of the guys doing these swaps aren't super familiar with LS. So there's 3 different spacings, but we'll cover that on a tech page on the website. So we'll link that in the description below as well. As we're talking about the website, mounts. You need my mounts to put one of these in. I try to make it as easy as possible. My mounts use the stock BMW lower, either the stock lowers or an aftermarket lower if you want to change them. But it makes it really simple to go in, gives you a little bit of flexibility front to back on the engine. Transmission cross-member options for all the transmissions we talked about here and more. If it's not listed on the website, you can message me and I probably have already made a mount for it. But right now, my kit is $585 currently. This may change soon. But this is going to get you engine mounts, transmission mount, the accessory drive that's going to bolt everything up, and you'll be able to drop the engine in. Don't need to talk about anything else there.
You know what's not on there?
Okay.
Holley.
Holley. I had it written here. So here, let's write ECU. ECU. We'll jump down here real quick. So ECU options. I tried to reiterate to everybody that a Holley Terminator X Max with drive-by-wire makes the swap so easy. The wiring video that's coming up will show you how quickly this thing goes together. You can talk to anybody in the LS space that's used both stock GM ECUs and Holley, but basically my cheap option here is to recommend people to use the $1,200 to $1,300 Holley kit that includes drive-by-wire. They're in stock on like Summit and Jegs. You can buy them, get them to your door in a couple days. It's got everything you need. It's got a wideband. Really don't need to talk about that any more than we already have. Mid-range, you want to go up from here. There's other options for the Holley if you're controlling an automatic transmission, or if you want to go up to like a Max ECU or a Dominator or something like that. These two here for the mid-range and high range. I mean, if you buy a Dominator, you're talking about like $3,500. The Max, are in the $2,500 to $3,000 range, so we'll just put $2,750 in there. And then there's add-ons.
Did the Max replace the HP?
The HP.
You're talking about Terminator Max.
I'm talking about Max ECU, not Holley.
Oh, you're talking about like what Drayson.
Yeah,
okay, I got you.
I mean, that's another option. I mean, any aftermarket ECU that's capable of drive-by-wire should work with this swap. So I'm not familiar with like Phytech and things like that, but I'm sure other aftermarket ECUs have no problem working with drive-by-wire pedals. It's a pretty common setup, 6-pin setup, 2 signals. Should be able to make it work with any aftermarket ECU like that. The Holley is just priced so competitively in that market that it kind of just takes the place of anything else. It's not really worth trying to make stock ECU work in here with the benefits you get of this system for a few $100 more. It's just the way to go. So we'll go back to forced induction. A lot of guys ask me questions about forced induction, turbos, blowers. I guess we could throw nitrous in there, but there's not a lot of options on the market right now for a swapped E90 to bolt on a kit. CX Racing makes a turbo kit, comes with headers, things like that. The few guys that I know that have used it, takes a lot of modification to make it fit, and it has a giant 3-inch front crossover. It doesn't work well with the fan, but that's an option. Really, you're stuck either fabricating your own turbo kit or having someone else fabricate a turbo kit for you. It's a little bit of a tight engine bay, but it's possible. My car's got a VS Racing 7875, fits pretty well, makes good power. These turbos make 800 horsepower on a 6-liter, fairly small package. So if you want to go turbo, you're really stuck doing it yourself. But on the low range for a turbo setup, I would say if you're going to build everything yourself and you're going to buy all the parts, you kind of don't need me to tell you how much this is going to cost, because if you're doing it yourself, you already know. But expect to spend, on the low end, if you buy cheap Chinese stuff, $1,500 in parts, a couple $100 in tubing, turbos, wastegates, things like that. Put it all together yourself and make it work. On the mid-range, another option for people is to use like an LSA blower, or use a ProCharger LSX transplant kit. Puts the blower on the driver's side facing backwards. Fits pretty well. Or an LSA or an aftermarket root style blower. You're talking about getting into the range for an LSA and everything you need to make it work, probably $3 grand. Or you get into aftermarket. Who makes those? I don't even know about
Aftermarket PD blowers,
yeah,
like Magnuson, Whipple.
Yeah,
bunch of different options.
yeah. I mean, here you're talking 5K plus.
Yeah, once you get into the kits,
Yeah.
that's like 5,000 to 6,000 is.
Yeah, that's like. Actually, you know what? If this is the high end, you're gonna buy something to make it work, like the LSX transplant kit. People have had those on these cars, and I think you're gonna spend like 6,000 with a decent head unit. But that'll be a setup that'll kind of bolt on for a blower. There's a lot of room on the cowl too, so a positive displacement blower is a decent option for these cars.
You should go back to accessories and add on air conditioning,
Okay.
because everybody wants AC.
Okay, let's just add it down here. So, speaking of accessories, we skipped AC. So I'm gonna put AC down here. For air conditioning, the easiest way we've figured out so far how to make it work is to use an F-body accessory drive and go ahead and use a factory GM F-body, make AC compressor and mount. You can get both of those if you gotta buy them new for probably about $400, and then you're gonna need to modify the GM line to connect to the BMW line. You couldn't go to an AC shop and have them crimp them together. You can buy some fittings from somewhere like Cold Hose, crimp them yourself, butt connect them, perma-clamp them. You can make AC lines work any way you want on the cheap end, but you're probably going to spend buying a new compressor, a new mount, lines, probably about $500.
You need the stock F-body manifold.
Yeah,
is what he's talking when he says lines.
Yeah, manifold lines. What I mean is the unit that bolts on the back of an F-body compressor. If you're using a truck spacing, you can use a truck mount and compressor. It's kind of the same deal. And then you can either adapt off of the truck compressor lines because they're in a little bit of a different spot. But as far as AC, you're going to use the GM compressor. You're not going to reuse the BMW compressor because it's not a standard clutched compressor. It's a variable displacement compressor, and we don't have an easy way to control that anymore once the BMW system DME is gone. So you're going to put a GM compressor in it, and you're going to kick the clutch on and off using some logic out of the Holley or out of the other ECU you're going to be using, and your trigger for the AC will come from the stock trigger using one of my CAN boxes, which I didn't put on here yet. That'll basically give you an input to the ECU when you press your stock AC button, so there's not really any wiring needed there. So I guess up here on the E90 mounts we can add on CAN box. It's probably going to be about $200 shipped. So there's your add-on there. So should we add all this stuff up here? Okay, so the other thing we left off the list here is kind of just miscellaneous. So you're gonna have a lot of miscellaneous little things that's gonna come up in a swap like this, and you really need the budget like $500 to $1,000 for that. In that category, I'm gonna put clutch hydraulics, plugs, fluids, wires, wire connectors. You're gonna maybe need a starter and a new battery, things like that. I mean, it always comes up. There's little things that are missing, so just plan on budgeting under miscellaneous $1,000. If you don't use it all, then you got some left over, but you're better off budgeting a little high. So we went ahead and added up some of these. This is going to be added to it because we just did it now. So like the low end with the manual transmission on our list that we came up with was just under $6,200. On the low end with an automatic, around $5,000. Mid-range with a manual on our list, $13,150. Mid-range with an auto, around $10,000. The high end, these high end numbers, remember, we're including a $10,000 engine. So that's why these went up a lot. So a high end with a manual, we got like $28,400. High end with auto, like $27,000. And remember, $10,000 engine, half the budget there.
None of those include forced induction either.
Yeah, none of those include this forced induction. So that's an NA setup with what we went over here in this video. So really, most of the guys that are going to be doing this swap are going to be in this like mid-range, I expect, unless you got 20, 30 grand to drop on parts to swap one of these cars, which a lot of guys do. I've seen some of these that easily have over $25,000 in parts in them. But my car is in this range in parts for probably just over 10 grand. But I did everything myself, bought everything used I could, kind of on the cheap end of the forced induction. So that's why with forced induction, I'm probably in parts just over 10 grand. Not including a car or anything like that. So that should give you guys a lot better idea of what it's going to cost to swap one of these. You can do it pretty cheap. You know, the guys that are going to say you're going to do it for $5,000, it might be possible. It might not be something you're super proud of when you're done, but it'll get you running. You can always modify it down the road. Still an LS, that 5.3, you can still put a big turbo on it and make 800 horsepower and it'll probably live. But you're going to need some other upgrades to make it do that. Yeah, we could talk about labor. So I was kind of thinking about this today. So there's realistically, in a car like Frank's white car, NA with AC, working, wired, plumbing, drive down the road, there's probably about 50 hours in that. So that gives you an idea on labor, depending if a shop's charging you $80 to $200 an hour. So that should give you an idea on labor, what you'd expect to pay a shop that works on LS stuff. 50, 60 hours, somewhere in that range, to get everything functioning correctly. But that's going to do it for this video. We've got some more content coming out. We've got the Holly video. We've got Frank's turbo car video. Might not be in that order because we're filming a bunch of stuff right now. But next thing with this car, we're going to get it out to the track again. We're going to try to crack an 8 before this power glide comes out of it. And then it's going back full street car trim. It's going to get a built for a lady with overdrive, new converter, and AC. So we're going to be going over AC in my car. And it's going to be back on the road, full trim street car. Whether or not I'm going to drive it, maybe post it for sale, maybe raffle it, maybe one of you guys wants to buy it. So we can move on to the next stage in this adventure. But that'll do it for this video. Catch you guys in the next one.